Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we are plunging into a story, one that's really been making waves. You see it across social media, hip-hop news. You even hear it on prison phone calls.
Yeah, it's got all those elements, doesn't it? Alleged betrayal,
Yeah.
whispers of federal informants, and of course the big one, connections to the Black Mafia family, BMF, a huge, sprawling drug empire back in the day.
Exactly. And at the center is Cuffy Gatling. His claims are, well, they're explosive. He's saying he was set up.
Set up specifically by Big Meech and Tammy Cowens. That's the allegation, and that this setup led directly to his, 27-year sentence.
Right. So, okay, there's this really potent narrative out there, getting amplified online. But what does the actual documented legal stuff reveal? Our mission today is simple. Cut through that noise. Let's examine Gatling's claims against the cold, hard facts from the legal system. We want to understand the real details of his conviction.
And what's so fascinating here, I think, is seeing how these narratives, the stories people tell, can just veer so sharply away from the legal facts on record. So we'll be looking at specific evidence, actual court records, and, importantly, the strategic decisions made in his case, just to give you a clear, really well-informed picture.
Okay, let's start there then. Cuffy Gatling's public story, the one getting all the attention. He claims deep personal ties to BMF, right? And Big Meech basically engineered his prosecution through Tammy Cowens.
And he specifically names her as federal informant, CS1, cooperating source 1.
Which is a massive accusation. It paints him as a victim, like he was railroaded into that 27-year sentence.
Absolutely. And these claims, they're mostly surfacing in pretty informal ways. Little bits of prison phone calls get shared online, audio clips posted by people like 50 Cent, lots of third-party chatter on YouTube. There's even a whole series called The Cuffy is Lying, dissecting it, Vlad TV, Hip Hop DX podcasts.
So lots of discussion about him.
Exactly. But what's interesting is his Instagram account says he's available for interviews, but we actually couldn't find any direct sit-down interviews where he lays out his case himself. It's almost all secondhand accounts or those prison call snippets.
Huh. So a ton of buzz, but maybe not much direct substance from the man himself in a formal setting. And it's not just his side being told, right? People are pushing back.
Oh, definitely. Several sources have put out content specifically rebutting his claims. Some have done really detailed breakdowns of the court paperwork, the actual transcripts. And this research points to what you might call a stark disconnect, a big gap between his media story and the legal reality documented in court. It shows he pleaded guilty, he accepted the sentence, and there's zero mention in those official documents of him getting some kind of deal for cooperating. That's where the story starts to diverge from the record.
Okay, so if that setup narrative doesn't seem to hold water when you check the court files, what does the official legal record tell us about Cuffy Gatling? This is where it gets really interesting, I think.
Right. If you look at the federal court records, the case is United States v. Gatling, case number 4.14CR00088, Eastern District of Missouri. They paint a very clear picture. Gatling was convicted on 5 federal counts. The sentence came down May 17, 2019, from Judge Rodney W. Sipple, 324 months. That's 27 years.
27 years.
And the charges
Included conspiracy to distribute large amounts of drugs. We're talking over 5 kilos of cocaine, over 1 kilo of heroin, serious weight. But the real kicker, the charge that really defined the case in that sentence, was possession of firearms and furtherance of drug trafficking resulting in death.
Okay, that's heavy. So this wasn't just some minor player then?
Yeah.
What did the records say about his role?
No, not at all. The records identify him as the leader of the Gatling Drug Trafficking Organization, or DTO, running from about 2009 to 2014. They documented him bringing significant quantities of drugs into the St. Louis area.
And the evidence. It wasn't flimsy. Far from it. The conviction was built on pretty solid stuff. Wiretap recordings capturing incriminating conversations, undercover DEA operations down in Atlanta, and crucially, testimony from his own co-defendants. A guy named Andre Rush was a key witness. And this wasn't some quick bust, it was a big multi-agency investigation. DEA, ATF, IRS, even the local St. Louis Metro Police were involved.
Okay, so a major operation. Did he try to appeal this conviction?
He did. He filed an appeal in 2020 to the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals.
Oh.
It got dismissed. The main reason was something called an appeal waiver in his plea agreement.
Meaning he'd agreed not to appeal as part of the deal?
Essentially, yes. By pleading guilty under those terms, he gave up certain rights to appeal the conviction or sentence. He hasn't given up entirely, though. He filed a new challenge in 2023. It's called a post-conviction motion. Basically another attempt to fight the conviction after the direct appeal failed. That's case 23-3611, also in the Eighth Circuit.
Got it. Let's go back to that huge charge, firearms resulting in death. That clearly implies murders were involved, who died, and why.
Yes, the federal case directly linked him to orchestrating 2 execution-style killings. The first victim was Theodis Howard, killed back on April 5, 2010. The second was Terrence Morgan, killed May 2, 2013.
And the reasons?
Both murders revolved around witness intimidation, retaliation against people cooperating or who he thought might cooperate with federal investigations. Howard, for instance, was killed because he had corroborated against Gatling's own brother, Duran, in a separate federal drug case. The feds found Gatling actually drove the getaway car in that shooting.
Wow. Directly involved.
Deeply. And Terrence Morgan. Gatling apparently believed Morgan's phone was tapped by the DEA after some drug deals went wrong. His thinking, according to the case files, was brutal. If Morgan was dead, the DEA couldn't use any recordings from his phone as evidence.
That is just chillingly calculating. Silencing witnesses by killing them.
It speaks volumes about the lengths he'd go to protect the operation. Ruthless.
Okay, so these are clearly murders. But you said the key charge was federal firearms resulting in death. Why that specific charge? Why not just pursue standard state murder charges?
That's where you see the strategic thinking of the federal prosecutors.
Yeah.
It's actually quite clever, legally speaking. They used a specific federal law, 18 U.S.C. Section 924(1), related to using firearms in drug crimes where death results.
Instead of going through the state courts for homicide.
Right. And doing it this way offered them several significant advantages. Things like stronger sentencing options. Federal law often allows for stacking sentences consecutively.
Yeah.
Better witness protection programs under the federal system. And it gave them immense leverage in plea negotiations.
Leverage how?
Well, facing these specific federal charges, especially with the potential for very long consecutive sentences, puts enormous pressure on a defendant to plead guilty rather than risk trial. What's really notable is that this federal strategy allowed them to secure a sentence equivalent to, or maybe even longer than, what they might have gotten from separate state murder convictions. That firearms charge effectively added a mandatory 17-year consecutive sentence just for the killings.
So it's a powerful federal tool to prosecute violent drug traffickers, even if the main charge isn't technically murder, as most people think of it.
Precisely. It's an innovative way to use federal statutes to tackle violent crime linked to drug trafficking.
Okay, let's pivot back then. We've established the severity of his actual conviction. How do those initial claims, the ones about him being a big player in BMF, hold up against that reality?
Yeah, this is where the story he tells and the official records really clash. When you compare his claims to the actual federal records from Operation Motor City Mafia, which was the massive federal takedown of BMF.
That was the big one, right? Multiple states, tons of indictments.
Huge. Over 150 indictments between 2005 and 2009. It generated thousands of pages documenting BMF's structure, leadership, operations. It was incredibly detailed. And when you look through those records for Dion Cuffy Gatling, well, the discrepancies become pretty clear.
So was there any connection to BMF and his family at all, or is that part completely made up?
No, there was a legitimate family connection. That part's true. But it wasn't him, personally. It was his brother. Federal court records do confirm that his deceased brother, Duran Wani Gatling, was documented as a BMF co-boss in St. Louis, working alongside another guy named Danny Dogman Jones.
Okay, so his brother was BMF leadership in St. Louis.
Yes. Duran was arrested in those big 2005 federal raids. They actually found him hiding in attic insulation. He later died in federal prison in 2006. So that family link is real and documented.
But what about Cuffy himself? Dion Gatling, was he named as being involved in BMF operations in any of those federal documents?
And that's the absolute key point. Despite all that comprehensive BMF documentation, wiretaps, DEA reports, indictments, cooperator testimony, there is no mention of Dion Gatling or Cuffy Gatling personally being part of BMF. Think about the main guys who cooperated in the BMF cases, people like William Doc Marshall, Omari McCree, Arnold Boyd, Benjamin Johnson. These guys gave extensive debriefings about who is who in BMF, the leadership structure, everything. None of them ever mentioned Cuffy Gatling.
So his current claims seem to be, what, borrowing his brother's history?
It appears he's conflating his family's real BMF connection, his brother's connection, with a personal involvement that just isn't backed up by any federal records from that era.
Yeah.
And then you also have to consider the timing, right? These claims about being a major BMF figure himself, they only really surfaced, 15-plus years after the main BMF prosecutions were over?
And right when there's renewed media interest in BMF with TV shows and documentaries.
Exactly. That timing does raise some, let's say, additional questions about the credibility of these late emerging claims.
Okay, let's talk about that sentence again. 27 years. You mentioned earlier it was technically a below guidelines sentence. The calculated range was 360 months. That's 30 years up to life.
Correct.
Now, a lot of people hear below guidelines and immediately think cooperation. They assume he must have cut a deal, informed on others to get that reduction. What does the evidence actually show about cooperation?
That is a very common assumption, absolutely. But in Gatling's specific case, there are multiple pretty strong indicators that he did not cooperate with the feds. The biggest one: you generally don't get a cooperation deal if you've murdered potential witnesses.
Ah, right. The killings of Howard and Morgan.
Precisely. As we discussed, he orchestrated those killings specifically to prevent them from cooperating with law enforcement. Federal prosecutors are extremely unlikely, bordering on never to offer cooperation benefits to someone who eliminates witnesses. That fact alone makes a cooperation agreement almost impossible to imagine here.
Okay, so if it wasn't cooperation, why did he get a sentence below the top end of the guidelines? What else explains that 27 years instead of 30 to life?
The most likely explanation is intensive plea bargain negotiations. Remember, those federal firearms charges carried immense weight, potentially even capital punishment implications given the murders.
So pleading guilty to 27 years was a way to avoid risking the death penalty or life sentence at trial.
Exactly. It avoids the risk of a much harsher outcome. Plus, pleading guilty usually gets you some consideration for acceptance of responsibility under the sentencing guidelines. And of course, it saves the government the expense and time of a long, complex trial. We looked for the typical signs of cooperation in the court records, things like Rule 35 motions, which are filed after sentencing to reduce it based on later help, or 5K 1.1 motions filed at sentencing for substantial assistance.
Did you find any?
None. No sealed cooperation agreements, no record of him being placed in witness protection, no evidence he testified against anyone else. All the usual flags for cooperation just aren't there. The fact that both the prosecution and the defense jointly recommended the 27-year sentence strongly points to a carefully negotiated plea deal, not a reward for snitching. And remember, his co-defendant, Andre Rush, the guy who actually pulled the trigger in the shootings, he got 25 years. Those sentences align with a structured plea strategy for the whole case.
That makes sense. So putting it all together, where is Cuffy Gatling today? What's his current status?
He's currently serving that 27-year federal sentence. Based on standard good time credits, his projected release date would be sometime in the 2040s.
Still a long way to go. And his legal fight.
His most recent move is that post-conviction motion filed in 2023 with the Eighth Circuit case 23-3611. He's likely trying to challenge the conviction or sentence again, maybe on new legal grounds that weren't raised before.
Okay. And one last piece, there was some mention earlier of DEA misconduct tangled up in all this. Did that affect his case?
Yes, that did come up during the broader investigation. It involved a DEA supervisor in Atlanta, Keith Cromer. Apparently, Cromer had an inappropriate relationship with confidential source one. The very informant Gatling claims was Tammy Cowan's.
Whoa. Okay, that sounds serious. Did it undermine the case against Gatling?
It was definitely a complication and a serious issue for the DEA. However, the courts that reviewed it ultimately ruled that while the misconduct was real, it didn't invalidate the core evidence against Gatling. So basically, they found that even with that misconduct happening on the side, the fundamental evidence proving Gatling's crimes, the wiretaps, the cooperator testimony, the drug seizures, remain valid and sufficient for conviction.
Got it. So it was a problem, but not one that ultimately derailed his conviction.
That's how the court saw it, yes. So to kind of wrap things up here, while Diane Cuffy Gatling was clearly a major drug trafficker who orchestrated multiple murders, the public narrative he's promoting, the one about deep personal BMF ties and being framed by Big Meech, it seems largely fabricated. It's just not supported by that mountain of federal court records we've looked at. His case really highlights that innovative federal prosecution strategy, using those enhanced firearm statutes to get a very long sentence for the murders, rather than relying on state homicide charges. And the evidence powerfully contradicts any idea that he cooperated. All signs point to a calculated plea negotiation to dodge even more severe penalties, like a potential death sentence.
Yeah, this has been a fascinating deep dive. It really shows the stark difference that can exist between a compelling story, especially one that goes viral online, and the verifiable facts that are documented step by step in the legal system. So what does this all mean for you listening to this? How do you navigate this kind of information landscape?
That really is the crucial question, isn't it? We live in an era where personal accounts, social media,
They can shape perception so incredibly quickly and powerfully.